Hey everybody, Brandon here coming to you again from the channel. Time for another video. This time I've got a commission request project. This is a path going through a pine forest. So just a handful of pine trees here with a dirt path going through it. You want to have a look at my process for doing this? Let's go see it now. All right, so again here, this is what the finished product is going to look like. I'm showing this again right now just to give you a couple of notes before we get started here. So as I planned this project in my head, again, this was a commission request. I knew that my sun was going to be coming in from this right side over here. So you'll see as the process unfolds that I'm laying my background in knowing that that's where my light source is going to be coming from. And then as we get further along with the project, I'm laying in areas just randomly across the floor of the forest here where sun is going to be striking the grass, the ground, the trees, whatever that might be. So as I get started on this, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch wash brush. Now again, this first half of this tutorial is just mainly laying in colors in the background. So whatever brush you have, if you're doing something similar, it doesn't really matter as long as it can cover some decent ground quickly on your canvas. So nothing small here when you want to get started. You know, a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, even an inch, 2 inch, depending on how big your project is. Use whatever brush you've got that can just lay in some color quickly. And the first thing I'm doing here is laying a little bit of a sky background here. This is just a touch of blue with mostly white and just a touch of black here to gray it out. And again, there's not going to be a lot of sky coming in back here, so I'm not real concerned what this looks like. Just putting in a little bit of background color here for what might be coming through the limbs at the end of the day. And then over on the right side, I'm really not concerned at all because that's going to get washed out with the sun itself over here on the right. So just blending in a little bit of color here to start this in the top, just to have something that shows through. Same thing now with the background of where my pine trees are going to be off in the distance. Okay, so the key to creating distance here and any kind of depth is to make sure you mute out or tone down your distant colors here. So this is a little bit of green, but it's washed out a lot with white and just a touch of black to gray it out. But just make sure that you are taking the tones down in the saturation to create distance. So again, a lot of white in here to really make this a less saturated color. And now on these top edges here, you'll notice I'm just kind of twisting, turning my brush a little bit, kind of getting the rest of the excess paint off while I'm creating a little bit of, you know, just brokenness to the top line. Now as I come back in here, I'm starting to lay in just a little bit more saturation, as you see that it's just a tad bit darker than what I laid down previously. And I'm starting to use my brush here in a vertical up and down orientation as I'm tapping in this color, just so I'm creating what could look like distant trees. And bear in mind this is pine trees, so what I'm going for here is darker at the bottom where it will be mostly tree trunks here, and then more green towards the top where you'll be seeing a lot more of the pine needles. So I'm bringing a little bit more darker color in here towards the bottom where tree trunks are, and then keeping it mostly green at the top. Again, keeping my saturations down here because ultimately we're going to be putting in our most saturated colors up front that will push all this back in the distance. So if you do anything here at this stage, like I just added more white in here, make sure that you keep your colors toned down when you're creating this distance. And it will make everything look better when you're moving colors forward. So just finishing out this background here, again, tapping in a little bit of a vertical motion here with my brush, just to create what could be distant trees. Bringing the darker stuff in here. This is a lot of blue with some black in it for these distant tree trunks that I've got here in terms of color. And then you'll notice here I start to turn this brush here, keeping these vertical brush strokes here moving up. So I'm creating the illusion again of distant tree trunks here, and I'm making sure I don't have, you know, a uniform full coverage of paint across this. I want to leave it very splotchy with gaps in between there, so it looks like a distant forest, and it'll make sense when we bring stuff into the foreground. So again, vertical brush strokes here with the darker blue and black mixed in, but still toned down with white, so it's not overly saturated. Now I'm just tapping in more of the green here towards the top of where, again, pine needles will be, bringing it up into the sky now, because I'm going to have trees here ultimately in front of all of this, and there's going to be pine needles all through this area with gaps of light of the background sky coming through in a few places. This is just random here, tapping corners of the brush, touching, filling in a little bit more in areas where I think I just want more coverage, breaking up that top line of my distant background there, bringing it back down into where these tree trunks are. So this is just random tapping of the end of the brush while I'm turning it, twisting it, creating what will be ultimately, the look of pine needles in the distance. Same thing over in this right corner, just a little bit shorter and smaller because it's kind of moving further away from us back here. Plus the sun is going to be directly above this area and will drown out a lot of what you can see here. So now I'm going to start bringing in my sun color. This is an afternoon sunset, so I'm bringing in some yellow here that's also, again, toned down with some white. And I'm just going to fade this in and touch it along the edges of a lot of my green back here, because that sun will be striking these pine needles that are off in the distance, all coming from this side. So I'm touching this color in on the right edge of all these areas that I have that green in, bringing it down into the tops of these trees into the distance. Going back and forth here with this color that I brought in for the sun, with just a little bit of green in it there to give the illusion that there's some trees back there that you can just barely make out through the blinding part of the sun there. Now I'm just, same brush, bringing in some brown with the mix I've been using just to lay in a background for where my ground is going to be here. Again, this is just laying some color in on the canvas, very, very non-specific here, just getting something down that I can work with. The ground here is going to be covered up with a lot of grass and kind of a reddish dirt path. Right down the middle here, I'm lightening it up a little bit where I know my path is going to be, so I just put a little bit more yellow in there just so I can know where my path is going to land. This is just orientation purposes for me. And then just coloring up the rest of the canvas here is all I'm doing. Still using that same wash brush. Now I have moved to a smaller liner brush to lay in individual tree trunks. Now here again is where we are bringing in a little bit more darker saturation so you can make out individual tree trunks in the distance. This is what I mentioned before, that you keep your backgrounds toned down in terms of saturation. So I'm just going to pause here a second and re-emphasize what I'm doing here to create this distance. Again, we laid that background in with colors that were a lot more desaturated in their concentration, tone, whatever you want to call it there. So mixed in a lot of white, a little bit of black to kind of gray them out, tone them down. Now putting in some individual tree trunks to start to bring a little bit of it forward here with the liner brush. So a little more saturated color. You can start to see now that you can pick out individual trunks here in that background. And then as I continue to work here, I'm just picking out spaces that it's a little bit lighter back there, that I can put a darker trunk in front of it where it will be very visible, and just starting to bring some of that forward a little bit and create that illusion of depth of a pine forest is all we're doing here. And it's all going to get pushed back ultimately when we start drawing in much larger tree trunks here in the foreground. Now I'm just going to start touching in a base color of green here. I'm still using that same wash brush. Okay, I'm not worried about a lot of detail. This is just again a muted down green here that I'm putting in because it's going to be some off here in the distance, and then up here in the front I'm just putting in some random areas where grass is going to be, and we're going to come back and highlight on top of it anyway. Now doing the same thing with some more red into this dirt color, because that's the kind of reddish clay I want to go for, and then mixing in a little bit of bright highlight here with some yellow, a little bit of white just to brighten it up in areas where sun will be peeking through. And this is again just random because I don't know where the trees land through this forest, where the sun comes through and where it doesn't, so we're just randomly picking some spots out. Same thing now with some grass highlight, moving to a smaller brush again, touching in brighter tones of this green back in random spots where sun is coming through in a variety of places and hitting the ground where grass is. And then here in the foreground, trying to draw out some more individual blades of grass just as it's getting closer to us, because it's going to be a little easier to see it. So highlighting in some individual blades of grass here in the front, just to give us that completion of depth. Once we lay some tree trunks in here, we might come back and pick out some individual places where it looks like sun might be poking through the trees that we put in place. But I'm just trying to do as much of this as I can before I start putting the main tree trunks in. We'll end up covering some of this up probably. So again, it's not a huge deal of where we put it and where we don't. I also want to show here where the sun is kind of hitting the left edge of this dirt path coming through here. So I'm brightening up just on this left side where sun would be coming in, and I make a couple passes here going back and forth with highlight colors till I kind of get the color I want. So a little bit of red in here, a little bit of yellow mixed in here, a little bit of white mixed in here. This is just trial and error on my part until I get the color the way I want. But again, you got to leave plenty of your little dark areas in there as shadows, but then brighten up where sun is hitting it on the left side of this path. Now I'll start laying in individual larger tree trunks moving forward. This is blue with a touch of black in there, so kind of a grayed out bluish darker color. I've moved to a 1/4 inch angled brush here and just drawing in random large tree trunks here. So the closer they are to us, obviously, the further down on the canvas they are into the foreground, and then I'm making them a little bit larger trunks. So just things to do to create that illusion of depth. The closer trees, lower on the canvas where I start them, and then the further ones are from us, obviously, higher on the canvas, thinner tree trunks probably. And then of course, again, more saturated colors here using, so you can see immediately how this is pushing all that background just further away from us. But I don't want to cover all that up, so I'm just kind of picking places here and dropping trees in, maybe where I didn't like the background as well. Now here in the middle, I've decided I want to leave this little area a little more open, so I'm putting a few more tree trunks that are visible right down the center here above where this path is going, because I'm not going to cover that particular area up with a larger foreground tree. So that's all I did, was lay a few more in back there where I decided I want to keep a little bit more of a space right through the opening of that path. Then I'll just finish laying in more of these trees on the right hand side to complete the forest of pines here, and then we will go back and put highlights in on the trunks themselves, also add more limbs to them and add more pine needles and things to these as well. I'm just going to draw this right through where the sun is, and come back and maybe thin a little bit of that color down and just kind of brush it over all this when I'm done with it, to give us the illusion of some sun rays coming through. So right now I'm just kind of painting over it. I'm not really worried about the fact that a blinding sun through there would make it harder to see those trees probably. With my smaller liner brush here, same color as I laid the tree trunks in, just added in a bunch of random limb pieces throughout the upper parts of those pine trees there. Now I am touching in a little bit of this yellow color that's a highlight from my sunset in on the right side of a lot of areas where the sun would be hitting the tops of these pine trees kind of throughout this forest in the distance. If I get a little too much color in an area I don't really like it, I'm literally just smudging it out with my finger. That softens it out, helps it blend a little bit better, so you'll see me poke it in there with my finger. Now I want to pause here a second and mention to you about the sun rays, because apparently for whatever reason I didn't get this captured on camera, but you'll notice now that I have some sun rays poking through here, and where the sun itself is, it's kind of blinding out those tree trunks. All I did was go back into that color, add a little bit more white to it to brighten it up just a little bit more, and then I thinned it down with water. This is acrylic paint, so I thinned it down with water and then just kind of brushed it in over top of those pine trees right there where that sun is, smudged it in with my finger a little bit so it kind of blocked out those tree trunks that I had previously put in there, and then just used a few strokes in the direction coming from that sun down towards the left to create those sun rays you see kind of poking through there. That's all I did to create that. Not very difficult. The key is just to thin that paint out so it's almost translucent as you bring it through there. And then again, I used my finger to kind of smudge it around where the sun itself is, so it kind of blotted out some of those tree trunks. That's how I created that look there. Now I'm coming in to put just a little bit of bark texture on these pine trees. This is just kind of a gray color mix, a little bit of brown in there. I feel like there's enough light here you'd be able to see some of this bark texture, but it's not, I'm not brightening it up too much. It's just giving the appearance and the effect of tree bark in there. That's all I'm really doing. And then on the side where the sunlight is going to be hitting these trees, I'm coming in now with a much brighter highlight here. It's yellow, some white in it. Just a tiny little touch of red here in a second to kind of orange it out in some of this areas, but on the sides of these pines where sun would be hitting, putting a much brighter highlight. And I'm not highlighting all the way up and down these trunks, just in areas where I feel like sun might be poking through. So pick out a few areas along these trunks where sun would be hitting on these edges. You see a little bit more of the orange color I brought in there on the edge of some of that. This is an evening sun, so I felt like I wanted to do that a little bit. Brightening up a few more blades of grass here where some sun might be poking through. And that's really about it. So here is the finished product. Again, this was a process of laying in a background with desaturated colors in the distance, keeping the tones down, and then darkening everything as we move forward so we create that depth, put our highlights in the right places. You can follow the same process to do something very similar, so I hope you enjoyed watching that and got some ideas of how to pull this off for a project you're working on. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.